Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 586 for the 10th of Tammuz in a regular year. So how long do you think it takes to establish a new habit or to break an old habit? So this is something which many people talk about, right? I don't know if you've ever tried to take on a new habit or to try to break a bad habit of some kind. And so while there's no solid scientific evidence for any of this to give a really strong and definitive answer, I don't know if there have been any studies in this regard. Maybe different habits are different and stuff like that. There is something that keeps coming up in a lot of literature, a lot of kind of informal books about habits, habit creation and formation that keeps coming up. And that's the number 3. So some people talk about it in terms of 3 days. Some people say it takes 3 months. I suppose it depends on how deeply ingrained the habit is or how involved the habit is. But there's something about the number 3 that really makes something into not just an activity, but a pattern. So for example, like let's say if you want to take on a habit of working out, of exercising every day. So let's say you sign up for a gym membership and you go to the gym. It's your first day at the gym. So it's probably going to be really exciting, right? You're like super pumped. You're really, really motivated and all that. And you go to the gym and it's this really fun experience, hopefully, and it's really good. You go home. Day 2, you wake up. You may or may not be excited to go to the gym, but you force yourself to go. Okay, great. You force yourself to go. It's really not what you usually do. You usually take a long time eating breakfast in the morning or something like that. And instead, you force yourself to get to the gym and it's starting to feel a little familiar. It's your second day there. It's not as novel anymore. By the 3rd day, when you go to the gym, it starts to become a pattern. It's no longer this like totally new thing. You start to look at the gym, everything seems familiar. You start to feel like the type of person who goes to the gym. And we can think about this in terms of stopping negative behavior as well. So let's say you want to stop eating after 7 p.m. Let's say you want to take on going to sleep on a little bit of an empty stomach, to not be so full, to be a night eater. So let's say you do this the first night. It might be really difficult. It might be really unusual for you because you usually snack late at night and that kind of thing. And then you stop doing that and it might be like really hard. But then the second day, you do it again, you force yourself and it might be difficult, but maybe it gets a little bit easier. Again, by day 3, it starts to become a pattern. It doesn't mean that you may never fall or fail again, but this is the beginning of the formation of a pattern. There's again that idea of the 3 months. I don't know. You can try that yourselves and see if that really makes sense. That after 3 months, that's when the habit really becomes ingrained. That's when it really sticks with it and becomes a part of you. So it's interesting that this number 3 keeps coming up in the literature around habit formation, especially in light of what we're going to be learning about today in the Tanya, which supports this idea that there's something about this number 3. There's something about doing something 3 times that really makes it a part of who you are. So since the topic here is Teshuva, so we're talking here about the idea of returning to God after making mistakes, after going against God's will. So this is, the Tanya discusses here the idea of, unfortunately, when somebody makes a mistake, when somebody sins, when somebody goes against the will of God, and how when a person does this once, then okay, that's not a great thing, right? But like, okay, they can kind of like dismiss it as like maybe a blip it's not really who they are. It's like, oh shoot, I made a mistake. You do it twice, okay, also not so great. Once you do something 3 times, then it starts to become a pattern. Then it's like, okay, this is kind of, I'm starting to become defined by this thing that I've been doing. And so the good news with us, is what we'll learn today, is that just as it takes 3 times for something to become a part of who you are, to do a certain action, and it becomes a part of your definition of yourself, you can use this power of 3 in order to have this thing no longer be the definition of who you are. So like if you don't go to the gym for 3 times in a row, that kind of means that you're not the type of person. That kind of means like if somebody says to you, like, what gym do you go to? And you're like, oh, I go to Crunch Gym or whatever. It's like if you miss 3 days in a row, you can't really call yourself the type of person who works out at the gym. But if you go for 3 days in a row, then you can confidently tell people that you are a gym goer. You are a fitness person. You work out, right? So same thing here. So the way this comes up today is in the context of the idea of fasting, which we've been discussing, again, is not tshuva. So fasting itself is not tshuva. Tshuva, again, is merely, is simply acknowledging the fact that you did something wrong, resolving to not do it again in the future, and stop doing that negative thing. That's what it is. But fasting, as we spoke about yesterday, can be a nice accessory to tshuva in the sense that it's sort of like a gift that we're giving to God as a form of appeasement to restore ourselves into his good graces. So what we began discussing yesterday is that the sages actually discussed they actually made a whole system of fasts and discussed how many fasts are good and are appropriate for different sins. So if somebody commits a certain type of sin, then there's a prescription for how many fasts they should do in order to restore their good graces to God. Again, it's not in order to fix the blemish in their soul, because that's what tshuva accomplishes, but this is in order to restore themselves into the good graces of God. So where this leads us into a whole discussion of, okay, so it starts to become a little bit out of hands. Like, let's say if a person does a certain sin, and some of the prescribed number of fasts for some of these sins is pretty high. We're going to learn about a certain sin today that the prescribed number of fasts for it is 84. So if you have 84 fasts every time you do that sin, what if you, God forbid, commit this sin multiple times? Then you're going to be fasting your whole life, right? So the good news with that is that according to the Arizal, the maximum number of like per times that you need to do these prescribed fasts is 3, because just like, and this goes back to that power of 3, just like the power of 3, it takes 3 times to do something, whether let's say in this case we're talking about sins, in order to have that thing like really be ingrained. So too, it takes 3 rounds, 3 repetitions of the fasting in order to obliterate that effect that the sin had. So let's get into the text and see how the HaTeshuva explains this. So for context, we are in the beginning of chapter 3 of Iggeres HaTeshuva, and the HaTeshuva begins by talking about the sages of the Musar. So the Musar sages who lived after the Arizal, and he talks about how they were divided in their opinions about somebody who repeated a sin many times, like how many fasts should they do. So some of them said that there's a prescribed number of fasts that a person should do if they engage in a certain sin. So every time that person sins, then they need to engage in those certain number of fasts. For example, so here the HaTeshuva gives an example of the emission of wasting seed. So like when a man wastes seed. So what is the prescribed number of fasts for this? So the prescribed number of fasts for this, according to the Tikkunei Tshuva of the Arizal, is 84 fasts. So if a person does this, engages in the sin many times, so let's say if a person does this 10 times, 20 times, whatever it is, for example, then according to this understanding, then they would need to fast 10 or 20 times 84. That's a lot of fast, right? It's like 840 fasts or 1,680 fasts. Like, again, you'd be fasting your whole life. It's a lot, right? And so, and the reasoning behind this is that this is comparable to the chatat offering. So the chatat offering was a type of offering. This was a korban that was brought, a sacrifice that was brought for every instance in which a person violated a negative commandment. So every time a person would violate a negative commandment, and this would be like when they accidentally violated a negative commandment, then they would have to bring a korban. So this korban chatat. So this was for every single time. So this was the reasoning behind the idea that every time a person, God forbid, commits a certain sin, they have to fast those prescribed number of times. So 10 times, 20 times, whatever it is, right? And however, the flip side, there's another opinion that says that no, it's not like a korban chatas, it's actually like a korban ola. What was a korban ola? A korban ola was brought for when a person would neglect to do a mitzvah aseh, a positive commandment. And even if a person neglected to do this positive commandment many times, they would become atoned. The atonement would come to them just for merely bringing one ola. They didn't have to do this a bunch of times. They didn't have to bring an ola every time they committed this omission of the positive commandment. It was just once, and that fixed them up for life, or at least up until that point. And this is explained in the first chapter of Zvachim. And so the accepted decision for this, so they kind of came to a compromise, it sounds like, is that you do it 3 times. So it's that you can fast 3 times the prescribed number of fasts for whatever the particular sin is. So for example, if we go back to the sin of wasteful seed, so which was 84, so you would do 84 times 3, which is 252 fasts. So basically, if a person engaged in a sin of wasteful seed, even if they did it many times, all they need to do is they need to fast 3 times whatever the prescribed number of fasts are for that particular sin. And that's true for not only the sin of wasting seed, but really for any kind of transgression or any seed or anything like that. And why is this? This is because of the teaching in the Zohar. And this is at the end of Parshas Noach on page 73b, where it says that as soon as mortal man sins once against God, he makes an impression. Right? So it's like every time we sin, we don't only blemish our souls, we make an impression above. If we do this a second time, then it makes an even greater impression. And then if we sin a third time, God forbid, then this blemish, this impression that we make penetrates from one side to the other, is what the Zohar teaches us. So thus, we need the number of fasts to also be 3. So and that's the end of the section for today. So again, it's just going back to the intro, and what we're talking about is it fits very nicely with this idea of 3, of this idea of the rule of 3, that if a person engages in any activity, here we're talking about a negative activity, if they do it once, okay, not great, twice, not great, 3 times, it's kind of made an impact. It's like this, it took over basically. But the good news for that is that then if we want to rectify the impression that we made with that activity, 3 times is good for that as well. 3 times is the amount of times, the 3 times the number of prescribed fast is what's going to make that lasting impression to eradicate the negative impact of the sin. So that's it for today. And tomorrow we will continue this chapter, and I'll speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.